If you're just joining us as an attendee, which means you're seeing like a TV show, you're not able to interact. If you're used to Zoom and doing meetings, the odds are you're probably used to being on the screen and having your video and having to mute yourself. If you're an attendee, if you're not one of the people on the screen right now, don't worry, you don't have to do any of that. It's like you're watching a TV show, but it is going to be a little bit interactive. So as you'll see, hey, my friend Stan is here. Stan, you're in Southern California. We're going to get you in a minute, but I thought I would give you a little minute or two extra just to say hello and see how you're doing.
Good. It's a beautiful day in Southern California.
When I first decided to put together this set of talks, you were one of the people I knew I had to have because we get along so well and do a great job. And I love your story about getting into Frank Lloyd Wright. So we'll get into that when it's your segment. But can you believe there's 300 people signed up for this? Isn't that great?
Yeah, I can. I mean, look, there's a lot of people out there that would be taking tours and tramping around these houses, and this is all we have to offer. So you got to go with what you get.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting, and we have a good spread from across the right world, both some very large sites, very small sites, publicly owned sites, privately.
It's a really good cross section. I'm very impressed with the group you got here.
Well, I did want to say thank you because the Right Attitude Facebook page, or group, which is quite large. You have what, 12, 15 people? How many people now?
We just rolled over 5,800.
Yeah, so just a couple people there. It really helped me because that's where I built this list from. Almost everyone who is on the talk today, I think with the exception of one or two, are all members of the Right Attitude Facebook group. Which, of course, people have to join by answering some questions, and it's a relatively exclusive group. So, hey, thank you so much for hosting that and working as hard as you do on it. I really love doing the Not Too Serious Architecture Hour podcast with you there.
Yes.
So, and we have a few. I mean, I'm sending you some details soon for a couple of new ones. So I've got some.
I've got a couple names for you too.
I love it. All right. Well, I'm going to send you away, and I'll bring you back on. You're going to be in the third session.
Oh, yeah. We'll be chilling.
See you in a little bit. Thanks, Stan. All right. So we are right now at 7 o'clock. My name is Tim Totten. I am a master storyteller specializing in the life and work of Frank Lloyd Wright. And I am so excited today to be able to bring you this really fun, what, lack of a better word, a show. And our show is going to be about Frank Lloyd Wright through the eyes of a guide. Basically, we're talking about docents, people that spend their time talking about Frank Lloyd Wright to the public. Now, pre-pandemic and hopefully pretty soon post-pandemic, one of my favorite things to do is travel the country talking about the life and work of this amazing architect and being able to share those great stories and amazing photographs and information about the architecture that he created and how it affected people in their lives. And one of my favorite things to do is either to speak at a Frank Lloyd Wright building. I've been able to speak in Barnesdale Park, where Hollyhock House is, in Southern California. I've spoken at Roby House, at Florida Southern College, at a few other Wright sites, as well as historical museums and women's clubs and community centers and museums and libraries and all sorts of places, schools, universities around the country. And my favorite thing, other than speaking to people, is to be able to stop at Frank Lloyd Wright sites and not only get a tour, but meet the amazing people that do that. And there are always really great stories about the things that they love and want to do, and why they are so into this great architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. So I wanted to bring their stories to you. So I really appreciate you being here. And I really appreciate you not only being here, but I appreciate these fantastic people we have lined up. And there are 8 of them. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and bring on 2 guests in just a moment. We are going to have a few ways that you can interact with us today, and those are going to be through the features here on Zoom. Now, if you're an old hat at Zoom, congratulations, you'll know what I'm talking about. But if you're not, I want to highlight a few things. There is the chat function. I got to figure out which hand to do it. You can click on that and type stuff, and people have already seen that, obviously, because there's a lot of chatting going on right now. Now, if you have a question that you want to make sure that we hopefully can get to during the presentation, in our final segment will be time to answer questions from you folks. You'll want to put that in the Q&A, and that's a button at the bottom that says Q&A. You can also raise your hand if you have a question, but it's easier really if you just hit the Q&A or the chat. The chat, of course, can disappear because other people type, so you might want to just put it in the Q&A. And I will put a couple polls and other things up as we go along, but before we get going there, I think it's probably time to get ready to bring in our fantastic other people. In our first session, we have two really great guests. Our first one is Chris Van Dyke. She is with the Pope-leighey House, which is in Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. She'll be popping on the screen in just a moment. She's going to unmute herself. And then we also have Ken Simpson. He is from the Frank Lloyd Wright Home and Studio in Oak Park, Illinois. And if you see me looking away from the camera, it's because I have to go find him on the list of 200 plus people that are with us today, and click on promoting him to panelist. So Chris, so nice to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And you look like you are at the Pope-leighey House at this moment, but I don't think that's possible. So is this magic?
It's the magic of Zoom. This is one of my photos that I found in my vast array of Frank Lloyd Wright photos that I thought would look good for this show.
And what's great is you sent me a few other photos, so I'm going to be able to share those as well. And then we have Ken Simpson. Can I call you Ken, Kenneth? What do you prefer?
Sure, Ken. Ken is good.
I love it. And you are somewhere near the home and studio, I would assume. You're not too far outside of in the Chicagoland area?
Yeah, Chicago suburbs, yeah.
I love it. So I want to start really, Ken, with you. We have about 15 minutes for our session. And I'm going to go get my trusty notes with all the stuff. And I've had a great time chatting with every one of our speakers today. Ken, so you got interested in the home and like, what got you interested in Frank Lloyd Wright to begin with?
Well, I grew up in Pittsburgh and was aware of falling water, and Frank Lloyd Wright was in the consciousness there from pretty young age. So always had an interest, always not the level I do now, but if Frank Lloyd Wright's site was near and any travels would try and swing by and take a look. And then job circumstances, ended up moving to Chicago, a long time ago, 1977. And shortly after that, got here, went to Oak Park, looked around, saw the wonderful things there. Many things had not been restored to the way they are now. And then when I retired a little over 5 years ago, signed up for their training and started doing tours.
Now, obviously you live close to there, so you are a volunteer, right? I mean, it's interesting how few of the people, I don't know that any of our docents today are actually paid staff. So you're a volunteer at the home and studio.
I am a volunteer. I mean, the trust has paid staff, people that coordinate the volunteers and make sure that all the tours are covered. And in a pinch, if they can't get a volunteer, they'll do a tour. But most of the tours are done by volunteers, yes.
Chris, how did you get interested in Frank Lloyd Wright?
Well, I grew up on the other side of Pennsylvania near Philadelphia, but was able to go to Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water when I was a teenager. And it just kind of resonated with me. And then I got busy with college and life and forgot about it. And then I moved to Alexandria and I realized there was another Frank Lloyd Wright house there, the Pope-leighey House. I found it, I visited it, and then raised my kids. And when they went to college, it turned out I was working next door. And so I started going up on my lunch hours and started becoming a guide because I had a lot of time on my hands after work and on weekends, and just really fell in love with the place and fell in love with sharing that with people.
I think it's interesting to think about how long people have been doing this as a volunteer opportunity. Chris, I think it's what, 20 years, right?
20 years.
That is so amazing. And Ken, how long have you been with the home and studio in the foundation?
Well, I'm a newbie compared to that, 5.5 years.
That's still quite a long time, especially when you consider that you're doing it as a volunteer. You've had some pretty good, you've had some great responsibility given to you, right, Ken?
Well, it's when they learn when somebody can't say no. And so you interested in doing this? Sure, why not? So do the neighborhood walk, what they call Right Around Oak Park, which is actually probably my favorite tour. It's a 3-hour tour. So, it's people that are very interested and pretty committed and are willing to spend the time. And it gives you that whole walk from the home and studio through the neighborhood down Forest Avenue to Unity Temple. And then got involved with their outreach to the elementary schools in the area. So they have 4th graders in all the elementary schools, which there are a lot of them in Oak Park, that we bring in and talk about geometry and architecture and take them through the home studio. And then we actually go into the classroom and work with the Frobel blocks, some little workshops. And it's just like I told you, Tim, it just floors me with all the video and virtual reality stuff kids have these days, how enthusiastic they are and how much fun they have with these little wooden blocks.
Right?
And probably my most, whoops.
I'm just showing you some
Oh,
pictures of while you're talking because I think that's a great
okay.
plan.
Probably my biggest time commitment has become researching for their, oh, there's the kids, the Wright Plus event that is typically every May, unfortunately not last year, but I'm what they call a research captain. So dig into the history, the ownership, the architecture of the houses that are on the walk that year, and provide all the content that the volunteers share with the guests as they walk through those houses at Wright Plus.
You shared with me this picture. Which house is this?
This is the Harrison Young House. It's the next block east there on Kenilworth from Forest Avenue, and a very early Wright project here. One of his remodeling jobs, quite a few remodeling projects around the neighborhood there. It was just kind of a nondescript farmhouse that he moved back about 17 feet and put a whole new front on it, and beautiful living room wraparound porch. And then this is the William Fricke house, an early Wright Prairie house. And
don't you have an interesting story about, I think we talked a little bit about the research that the kind of research you get involved in when there's a Wright Plus event. So I know you got really involved in this particular house.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. I mean, being a Wright house, it's been on Wright Plus numerous times and has been researched by a number of people over the years. So it's great to have all that background, but then it's a challenge. How do you come up with something new? So I really talked to the homeowners, the current homeowners. Is there anything that you haven't learned? And the one little question that they said was never answered, was evidence of a fire in the garage, which was in the foreground in that previous picture. And the garage was it was designed by Wright, but for the next owner, whose name was Emma Martin, no relation to all the other Martins in the Wright world. But and I did find that one of Emma Martin's son had one of the very early electric vehicles that were pretty popular in the beginning days of automobiles, and a wiring malfunction in the vehicle when it was in the garage started a fire and left this charring of the beam. So it's been there for a very long time. So they were very surprised to learn it had happened that long ago.
What a great opportunity for you to be able to find that kind of information out. You know, one of the things that's really great about volunteering at a Frank Lloyd Wright house or a building of any kind for a long period of time, Chris, is the ability sort of to get the place to yourself sometimes. Isn't that right?
That's correct. One of the reasons I love being a volunteer tour guide is because I get to go into the pope-leighey house and sit on that chair, oops, wrong way, that chair over there, and look out the window, watch for people coming, but just read the Sunday newspaper or just sit and enjoy living in a Frank Lloyd Wright house without having to pay for it. And so that's why I volunteer my time. And it's very special to watch the light move through the house and see the different designs it makes on the walls. It's really special.
One of the things I find interesting for both of you, I think, Chris, this probably fits more to you, is that both of these sites are part of a larger organization. So the Home and Studio is part of the foundation, which is responsible, Ken Wright, for a number of places like Roby House or the Rookery. Yeah. And the Trust. I always mix those up. So any of you listening who are a member of the Trust or the foundation, in my brain, they don't really separate, but they are different completely. So the Trust in Oak Park, the Trust runs quite a bit in Chicago. And so, you know, I know it took you quite a while to get to, sometimes it takes a little while to get through the organization. Same thing though for you, Chris, because Chris is an interesting connection. Pope-leighey House wasn't originally in its site where it is now. It was moved. Where was it moved to?
It was moved from Falls Church, Virginia, to this grounds of the Woodlawn Plantation. And it was because the Woodlawn Plantation was the first home owned by the National Trust, and it had a property that looked similar on the corner of it to the site where the house was originally built, which is so important with the Frank Lloyd Wright house. And so they were able to move it there safely, provide it support, and allow the second owner, Mrs. Leighey, to move in and live on the property until she passed away. So we're just very happy, even though we didn't want it to be moved, we're happy that it could be saved and put into a similar environment.
Well, but when you got there, I think they kind of made you, you had to give the tours at the old plantation first, didn't you? Which is not what you really
Well,
wanted to do.
yeah, 20 years ago when I said I wanted to be a Frank Lloyd Wright guide, they said, oh, we have enough of those, but we really, really need someone for Woodlawn. So I'm always a person who's willing to help. So I went ahead and learned the Woodlawn tour and kept doing the Woodlawn tour. And then suddenly I noticed there were new guides at the Pope-leighey house, and I didn't know why it wasn't me. So finally I went and said, you know, what's happened? Did you forget my reason I'm here? And they finally acquiesced and got me going. And it wasn't until years later that somebody said, well, they seem to want, in the beginning, they wanted all the men to be guides at Pope-leighey and the women went to Woodlawn. So fortunately, that doesn't happen anymore. And we are a very diverse group of guides in both places, but it was just, you know, Woodlawn was there first. And I think it took them a little while to accept Pope-leighey on the corner of their property was actually pretty popular with men and women. So.
And it's quite a different place, because sometimes people show up on your tour who maybe are there just because it happens to be another tour they can do
Yes.
at Woodlawn. And I know, Ken, you have that too, because Oak Park is, you know, so close to Chicago. There's Ernest Hemingway stuff in Oak Park. I think we talked, Ken, that you have a favorite kind of guest on a tour. So, you know, there's all kind of guests on a tour, the ones who really want to be there and those who don't. Which ones do you prefer?
Well, I mean, love them all, and especially now. I like to see them show up, but the ones that are always the most surprising, particularly when I was fairly new at it, is when you'd walk a group through and it seemed like a spouse or somebody was dragged in that, yeah, okay, they want to go this tour, I guess I'll go through. And they look like they're the least bit interested, but you leave the building and you're thanking them for coming and everything, and they're like, that was amazing. I never thought that's what I was going to see. I have to go see other Frank Lloyd Wright buildings. Like, okay, well, you hid that interest very well, but I'm glad you liked it.
I think that is so much fun, because it really is. That's my favorite. I love turning somebody to the, you know, to Frank Lloyd Wright. Ken, do you have a favorite place? I asked Chris about it already. She really loves that space in the living room. At the home and studio, do you have a place you just can't get enough of?
Well, there's quite a few great places, but my favorite, and it just kind of conveniently falls at the end of the typical tour through the home and studio, is the octagonal library on the studio. And it's just such a, you know, it's a magical place. It's pretty compact, but there's so much detail. I mean, Wright puts detail in everything, but you know, he just really did his magic in that room. And you know, it's just what I say to guests here. I can just picture Wright sitting here. We have the original table. He's got his prospective clients. He's hugging them. Those bulletin boards just, you know, kind of surround you with the beautiful renderings that Marion and others did of the beautiful buildings that he was thinking about. And, you know, just the space, the staggering, the twisting of the octagons in the upper part of the room, the window above the fireplace that, you kind of start them at the beginning of the tour in the living room with, oh, look, he put a recessed mirror above the fireplace to make it look like there's an opening, but the chimney's back there. Well, by the time you get to the end of the tour, well, now he's convinced the masons, the bricklayers, I need you to step the chimney over to the side here and let me have a window above the fireplace. So there's just so many things in that fairly cozy little space.
Chris, I know you have a favorite tour that you like to give or be part of, isn't it? It's something, a special tour there?
Yes. During the summer months, when it's not too hot, we have the Twilight and Tipple tour, where you get to sip a glass of wine and have some light snacks outside. And before COVID, you got to roam freely around the house during the inside. During COVID, we still did that outdoor tour, but you just got to go in one at a time so that you got the house to yourself for a few minutes and then let somebody else go in. And so it's just wonderful to see the house in the daylight, to see how it is. And the twilight comes and it just makes the house come to life. And then once the sun sets and the glow of the lights from the inside through all those clerestory windows start showing through, you realize that you're just sort of looking at a Japanese lantern. It's just such a treat. And it's truly a phenomenal sight. So I'm looking forward to starting those tours again. I think they're going to do them in May or June. So.
Well, hopefully I'm sharing a picture right now of Pope-leighey. I wanted people to
Yes.
see the outside of it with those great windows. And Ken, at the home and studio, you strike me as the kind of guy who, once you get started talking, this is not a negative thing, that you like to really give a full tour. Do you have a favorite tour with the trust?
Well, I think I mentioned that the Right Around Oak Park tour is really my favorite, because I get to do the home and studio, get to show them from the beginning, the bootleg houses, walk down Forest Avenue and just show the amazing variety there. If people haven't seen the Nathan Moore house, the scratching of the head and the jaws dropping, and what? That's a Frank Lloyd Wright house, and that whole history there of the Christmas Eve fire and the redesigning and rebuilding, and the Hertley, Beachy, all those beautiful houses there, and end up at Unity Temple and just talk about that amazing building. So it's
definitely a tour that people need to go take with you. And I can't believe how fast 15 minutes goes. So I'm actually done with our segment, but I'm going to have you back at the end because we have questions already pouring in from people, including Chris. We're going to have you answer why they moved the house. Okay. When we come back near the end. So I'm going to say goodbye to each of you. Chris, I'm going to wave you off, but you're not going away. You're just going to disappear into as an attendee. So thank you so much, Chris. That's Chris with the Pope-leighey house, and of course Ken with the home and studio. Hey Ken, thanks so much, and I'll see you back in a little bit.
all right.
Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us and participating. I got to find our other next people, and I'm just going to go to my list to make sure I know who's coming up next. We have a couple of really great guests. We're going to have Fred Unwin. Fred's with the Weltzheimer-Johnson house, and I actually need to, Fred, I did this the wrong way. I've got to figure out how to make you a panelist. There you go. You're coming along. And Fred's going to be joined by Larry Betts with the Dana Thomas house. And what I really love is that both Larry and Fred are from completely different types of houses. So we see Fred on the screen there. Fred, how are you today?
We're pretty good.
And so I'm going to make sure I get my notes for you, Fred, and then Larry. There's Larry. Hey, Larry.
Guys.
So tell me, Fred, and we'll get right into it because I want to have time for questions later. Fred, you're with the Weltzheimer-Johnson house. I'll get some pictures together in a minute, but tell me, what brought you to the Frank Lloyd Wright world and interested you in Frank Lloyd Wright?
You asked me that before, and I honestly think it was always there. Although I believe the first house I ever saw was Totten in New Canaan. I was on a tour of mid-century modern houses in New Canaan, of which the Glass House was one, and the Frank Lloyd Wright house, and the Marcel Breuer house. And I think that was number one. But I would have gone to the Guggenheim really shortly after it opened, 5-10 years after that. So, but there's always been an attraction with Mr. Wright.
So Fred, I'll get a picture of your house on the screen in just a minute, the Weltzheimer-Johnson house. Larry, you also come to, what I think is fun is that how far everyone has to go. Now, many people it's in their backyard. So Fred, for you, you're not too far from Oberlin, right? Where the Weltzheimer-Johnson house is. But Larry, you travel, what, 100 or more miles to get to the Dana Thomas house in Springfield, Illinois?
It's 104 miles from my driveway to the Dana Thomas house.
So when how long, Larry, have you been a docent with the Dana Thomas house?
About 18 years.
Wow, the dedication driving 104 miles. What was it about that? I'm assuming you toured the house at some point and something happened there for you?
I retired in 2000, and one of the things on my bucket list was to go to the Dana Thomas house because at that time it was the nearest house around that was a Frank Lloyd Wright house. And I had been kind of turned on to Wright, seeing pictures of falling water when I was in high school. And so on my bucket list was to go there, and I went, and I was wowed. I was just totally wowed. And so I went, and it's, as some of you know, it's 12,600 square feet. So it's on the opposite end of the spectrum from the Pope-leighey house. I was just overwhelmed with it. So I thought I needed to go back. So I went to about 4 tours in a row. And finally, the one docent that I had several times says, "You should be a docent here. You know more about this house than I do." So, and I told her, I said, "I live over 100 miles away." She said, "Well, you could just come up maybe 2 or 3 times a month and give tours." So I agreed to that and went through the training. And started doing it.
I do want to share a quick picture. I mean, we're talking about a 12,000 square foot house. Larry, this is one of the photos you shared with me. What part of the house is this?
This is the reception hall, part of the reception hall. It's a two-part, as you can see over to the left, it's a 7'4" ceiling, and it goes up to a 26-foot ceiling in the center here. So this room is amazing how Wright used contrast to give a wow effect. I mean, over to the left is where you enter this room coming up the stairwell from the entry hall. And when you walk into that room, you can't help. It's like I tell my visitors, it's like walking up to the edge of the Grand Canyon. You can't help but say, wow, or holy, you know what. And
I think I've had that experience, Larry. I think I've actually had that experience.
And he's accomplished this with a vast number of contrasts in the room. And I don't know if we have time to go through those, but.
Well, I would love to talk, though, there is something really engineeringly, that's not even a word, but from an engineering perspective, there's something truly impressive in this room. Isn't this something about, you told me something about steel beams, I think?
As far as we can document, this is the first residence built in the United States has steel structure. There's 36 steel beams that make this house possible. And one of the areas you see right here is this overhang from upstairs that you couldn't accomplish, especially in 1902. You wouldn't be able to accomplish that with wood. And
yeah,
so there's steel beams holding all that up.
You know, I think it's amazing when we look at the structure and what gets made, and we also look at Fred, the kind of design that Wright did. Now we had Chris from the pope-leighey house, and I want to bring up a picture of the weltzheimer-johnson house that I have to find, but I'm going to do that. I want you to talk a little bit about the kind of design that weltzheimer-johnson is, and you know, the sort of things you've gotten to do from a research perspective there.
Well, when we sort of first started, when I first started there, that there had been a very scholarly publication that sort of answered all the questions. And every time I thought I had found something else new, I went back to the book, our bulletin, and it was there. Now, I think there have been new things that we with recently with that. The interesting thing about the weltzheimer house is it was not built as Wright designed it. It has been modified, it has been restored, and it has been reevaluated. So there's really not a lot of historic fiber that's there, fabric that's there. So it gives you a feeling for what the house is all about, but it's not so museum-y that you can't feel at home there.
Fred, do you have a particular thing that you like most about the house? I know that actually, what do you like most about when people come to tour? I think we had talked about the plans. I like how focused you are on Wright plans.
Well, I always think that because the house never existed as Wright designed it, it's wonderful to talk about the plans as his ideal house, the ideal Usonian. I think we're in a very unique point that we're a little bit later than the early sort of Usonians, but not as elegant as the ones that really come in the late 40s, early 50s. I'm going to be down there tomorrow. I can't wait to see it again. I like to stand in the front in the just as you walk into the living room and look out over the lawn, and you really understand what Wright is saying, what Wright's doing. He's exploded the box. He's made in what is relatively a small space something that looks elegant and looks enormous. Where I like to stand, the upper right-hand corner of that, looking out the window, because I think you really see what the whole the house looks like. That I'm going to say that when anyone visits us soon, we don't have the piano any longer. That's gone out of the house, just because we don't heat in the winter. It was being detrimental to the piano itself, so that has gone back to the conservative.
So Fred, I think real quick, I think that when we talked, you had said, I asked you what other house you would want to be a docent at, and I think you said something about pope-leighey. Is that right?
Pope-leighey really blew me away. I mean, I think it was so simple. It was so elegant. He used so many same things that we see at weltzheimer-johnson. And that somebody was actually living there when I first went to there was really sort of exciting. I believe that I went there on a Saturday. I remember Mrs. Leahy would sort of vacate the premises, and you could go and tour it for a while. So,
Larry, your favorite spot in the house of the Dana Thomas house?
Dining room.
The dining room. I have a great
Dining
picture
room.
actually of that. So this is from up above, isn't it?
That's from the musician's balcony above. Yes.
I mean, I think you could probably spend, because you and I talked for quite a while about the impressiveness of this dining room. Tell us a little more about why this is such a great space in the Dana Thomas house. It's such a huge house anyway, but so there are so many great spaces. What is it about this one for you?
Well, ironically, this was not going to be part of the house. Originally, the dining room was a one-story room. And early in the construction of the house, Mrs. Dana's grandmother passed away. And that caused some moving around of bedrooms. And Mrs. Dana's mother's bedroom was supposed to be on the second floor at this point. And they were able to eliminate that. And she went into grandmother's bedroom. So then Wright took that space and opened it up into a two-story space with a barrel vaulted ceiling. Now, as some of you know, there's already a barrel vaulted room in the house that had been planned. So now there's two. And as far as we know, he only did about 4 or 5 barrel vaults in his whole career. But the barrel vault goes actually to Dagmar Adler, Louis Sullivan's partner. He was an engineer. He was not an architect, and he was into acoustics. So that's what, but there's so many things about the room. The mural on the wall, 4-wall mural by George Mann Niederken. There you can see this is primarily sumac, which is a feature plant of the house, but there's also goldenrod and purple aster in that. And then the butterfly chandeliers that hang in each corner, as you can see there. They're just phenomenal. The table, there's 3 tables in the room. When they're all put together, you can seat 40 people at a time. And there's 40 dining room chairs, believe it or not. Half of them are high back and half of them are low back. The low backs would be altered so you could serve over them. The high backs were designed to create a small, intimate room within a larger room. And there's no direct light in the room at all. Everything is indirect, including sunlight, because the bay window is on the north side of the house. Wright wrote later, there's the sumac windows in the bay. Wright wrote later that he designed Mrs. Dana's dining room to give the effect that you were eating outdoors under a large shade tree. And when you kind of go into the room with that attitude, you can see what he was trying to do here. But I could spend a whole hour. We're supposed to give when I was giving regular tours, we were supposed to give them in an hour, which was very difficult for me. I could spend a whole hour in the dining room easily.
It's fun is that I spent quite a bit of time with Fred because I was able to go get a tour of Weltzheimer-Johnson with Fred. One of the things that I love, Fred, is that, because it's part of Oberlin College, but it's not the enormous focus of Oberlin, there's very few people actually doing the volunteer work there. So it's a relatively small group of people, isn't it?
Correct, yeah. We're only open, once a month from, in good year, from April to November. So there were not tours, only one 12 to 5. So we don't have a lot of people, yeah.
But that means that you get to help with quite a few things. I think you've been to the Avery to do some research, right? And you worked on an upholstery project as well.
Before COVID hit, when we all had to shut down, I had discovered that the Avery has a landscape plan that we didn't know about. It's very similar to one that we had, but there's a slight wording that's not on everything else. And so it makes me realize Wright spent a lot of time with this, and I had really thought this was something that Wright never really paid a lot of attention to, but I think he did more than I ever would have given him credit for.
We're going to talk, Larry, you and I will talk in a little while. I have a story I want you to share in our last segment, about meeting people from other parts of the country and around the world. But Fred, you've gotten to meet quite a few people from around the country and the world,
Right.
because Oberlin can attract a pretty worldly group of people to the college there, right?
Yes, yeah, we had a celebration of the addition to the Allen Memorial Art Museum, which was designed by Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. So we had a little reception for them at the house. And I felt honored to know that Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi were in our house, sat in our bedroom. And then we had, years ago, we had a family or a group from Korea, and we were always, going in talking about how we have the radiant heating and all that. And the man interrupted me and said, and I knew exactly what he meant. It isn't, but it is. It's radiant heating. With the Koreans would have heated it with hot air, and we heat it with water.
And actually, it makes the house pretty toasty, doesn't it?
Well, not any longer. The radiant heating doesn't work any longer. And that's one reason why we're closed during the winter.
Well, luckily, our next guest, Donna Sharp, is at another Usonian house, and their radiant floor heat still does work. So I'll ask her that question. And Larry, is there a Wright structure you're still eager to get to? You've been doing this at Dana Thomas for 18 years, but where are you still waiting to go?
My next is Florida Southern.
Well, I might know somebody who can give you a tour there, Larry.
I'm counting heavily on that, Tim.
They give me the keys. I mean, I have to sign stuff and whatever else, but I do get to give tours there. So that excites me because I love being able to share with people who have such knowledge and have done so much with other Wright sites. And I'll tell you, but I have had such a great time, not only with both of you now, but being able to see the structures that you work at and know that you're part of this community of people who really want to keep this story going and share Wright's amazing vision with everyone. So I want to thank you so much, Fred. Thank you so much for joining me now, and I'll see you back in the last segment, okay? Thank you so much. I'm going to send you back there. And Larry, thank you so much. I feel like I could sit and talk to you for a couple of hours. So maybe we'll work on seeing you on the Not Too Serious Architecture Hour podcast at some point. So
That'd be great.
I'll have you back in just a little bit, okay?
All right, thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the show so far. Well, we already have some questions in the Q&A. I see quite a few of them. So thank you so much for bringing those in, and people are using the chat. Next, we're going to have some people that you've probably seen before. And one of them is going to be Stan Eklund. He'll be along in just a moment. He is the head of the Wright Attitude Facebook page group. But also joining me now is from the Affleck House in Michigan, Donna Sharp. Hey, Donna, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you guys?
I am doing great. I'm trying to make sure I get everyone in here. So I'm going to bring Stan up too. But Donna, tell us, where's the Affleck House in Michigan?
The Affleck House is in Bloomfield Hills, which at the time, it's just north of Detroit, maybe 20, 25 miles. And at the time it was very, very wooded, very Frank Lloyd Wright, please find something that no one will build on kind of a lot, and in the country. And of course, it's no longer that way.
Well, yeah, of course, right? I want to share a picture of, before I welcome Stan in, I want to share a picture. This is a side view of part of the house, right?
Correct.
And this is sort of like a Usonian house that has a basement space underneath it. And so it's got his sort of typical wants to build into the side of a hill type of thing, doesn't it?
And he did. And that's what actually anchors the rest of the house. He didn't like basements, as we all know. Mrs. Affleck thought that the site, you could use a basement, and they also put a maid's quarters down there, which was never used. They never had a maid. Yeah, it's a very unique Usonian in that we do have that basement. Yeah,
this is a great view of a rendering of the house.
Yes.
To show the way
that was from Michael Pfeiffer. He's, as you know, he's done thousands of renderings. He sent that to me. Yep.
Well, now we also have half of the man himself. It looks like half of Frank Lloyd Wright is here. Probably the most notable part, which is his mouth, that certainly made a lot of pronouncements. Stan, you look a lot like him when you wear that mask, by the way.
Just wanted to make sure that you had the virus filter turned on and we were properly socially distanced. So,
Well, I think we're socially distanced because you're on California.
Well, I feel safe then.
Now, Stan, people can listen to a lot more of this in the episode of our podcast, the Not Too Serious Architecture Hour, where you and I talk about your Wright origins. But will you give me the quick version of what got you interested in Frank Lloyd Wright?
A book, the Frank Lloyd Wright, The Houses by Alan Hess. I'm actually pretty new to the Wright world compared to a lot of folks. Back in around 2010, 2011, someone gave me that book, and it literally sat on my coffee table just like you would think it would. But around 2012, I was in Phoenix on business, had little time to kill, drove out to Taliesin West because I knew this Frank Lloyd Wright guy had something out here. Didn't have time to tour, but had time to see the roof lines as they work up their way to the McDowell Hills, and realized there was something pretty special here. So I went home and pulled that book off the table, absolutely fell in love. A month later, I was taking a week-long vacation to go to Taliesin West and the rest of the stuff in Phoenix. And the rest, as we say, is history.
Now, this is Hollyhock House in California in Barnesville Art Park. And
Yes.
this is the one in, well, this is the open Wright house in your backyard, isn't that right?
Correct.
But not open right now, but it did open what year did it finally get restored and opened for tours?
We reopened in 2015. We were closed from, we had 3 or 4 major renovations over the years, but our most recent one, 2010 to 2015, was the bring it back to what it had always been back in 1922 reno. And we reopened Valentine's Day of 2015, and until the pandemic hit, had been open ever since.
Now, but that's when you first got to like go back and then decide you were interested in becoming a docent. So that's only a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Was there interest? These are questions that obviously I know the answer to because I don't ask questions I don't know the answer to. There was some interest, obviously, in the house when it first reopened, wasn't there?
Oh yeah, there was they decided to do a little stunt because we'd been closed for so long, and people complained that they never knew when it was going to be open or closed. The city decided to reopen the house for 24 hours straight over Valentine's Day weekend. Admission was free, and you could take pictures. And we thought some people would come through. When I say we, they thought some people could come through. I was actually one of the people who lined up early on. I was number 8 in line when they reopened the house. Much bigger deal than people thought. This is actually the line at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I went through the house with the first group, found out the hard way that they were allowing you to take pictures, and I didn't have my camera. So I came back at 3 o'clock thinking, well, I'll just waltz right in. And that was the line that was waiting. So it was worth it, though. I did get to spend 5 hours in the house, got to watch the sun come up. And if watching the sun come up over a Frank Lloyd Wright doesn't make you fall in love with architecture, then I don't know what does.
I love how this is the picture of everyone else with their camera,
Yes.
but you hadn't brought yours originally because you didn't think they were going to let you take pictures.
Yeah, this ran in the LA Times the next day. And all these people are standing there with their cameras and their tripods, and I'm standing there with my hands in my pocket. Easy to spot with the short pants. But
we're so used to Frank Lloyd Wright houses not letting you take pictures in them.
Absolutely. And you would find that if you walked up to the front door of Hollyhock House now. But it was a wonderful experience. I got a wonderful introduction to the house. Decided the next day, I should see if I could be a docent here. I'll put in my application and wait the several years that I know will be of the waiting list. Got an email back later that afternoon saying, we've got a class starting in a month. Would you like to come in? And I've been doing it ever since.
Now, I think I'm going to get to you, Don, in just a minute. I haven't forgotten you, but I have some great pictures I want to Stan, this is probably the benefit of you being a docent there and also being a photographer.
Yes.
Look at some of the pictures you get to take.
Well, I will confess that I was there this day shooting with Andrew Peelage. And when you were there, if you don't have some of that rub off on you, you're not trying. But this was the wonderful magic hour that we talk about at Hollyhock.
Yes.
When the sun starts to come in through the south facing windows of the house and south and west, and the living room. This view is from the music room, looking through the living room into the little reading nook on the other side, and the place just glows. We talk about it having taken on the color of buttered toast. And you can kind of get a sense of that there.
It's so good. So Donna, tell me, what got you involved with Frank Lloyd Wright?
Well, I was in co-op architecture in high school, hoping to become an architect, and was kind of talked out of it by our teacher. He said, you know, architects don't make any money, which I wanted to make money. And but had always been interested in Frank Lloyd Wright. I received a coffee table book, like Stan did, and it kind of sat there for a while until I realized that, you know, these were actually places that I could go see. And I think he's an amazing architect. I love all of the periods he's gone through. Every chance I get, every city I go to, I find a house.
You started pretty big though, didn't you? Where was your first Frank Lloyd Wright site or sites to go see?
So I did a tour with Lawrence Tech, who owns our house. We went to the Affleck House. We went to the Smith House, which is owned by Cranbrook, another Usonian. And we went to the Dorothy Turkel House, which is privately owned. So I saw all three. I was impressed with all three, but fell in love with the Affleck House.
I want to share a picture of the house because I think there's a really good one. I'm gonna have to make sure I do something first before I do that, because it's zoomed way in for some reason. I don't want it overly zoomed. Oh, there we go. That's gonna be better. Because it really is sited beautifully. We saw that sketch obviously, and I want to show the actual house. You know, this is from the other side of it. What a fantastic site for the house. And I mean, sometimes when I think of Usonian, I think a relatively small flat to the ground, because my first Usonians were like Pope-leighey, weltzheimer-johnson.
Sure.
This house is pretty dynamic.
It's very dynamic. It's also one of the largest Usonians at 2,300 square feet. It has a very unique room in it. It's called the loggia. If you've been there, you know what it is. It's a beautiful room, mostly full of windows, all skylights, and it's as you walk into the entry, you know, the right compression and then release into this beautiful room, absolutely stunning room. And I would say there you go. And there should be another view, but I would say that that's probably my first and favorite room in the house. And then if I'm going to be sitting and looking outside, I will go into the public spot, one of the public spaces. And we do allow people to sit on our furniture. We do allow photos. So, you know, it's all windows and it overlooks this beautiful pond. It's a very, very special home. It's my happy place.
So, you know, one of the things that I won't spoil it for other people, because I don't want you to actually spoil this. If you get to the Affleck house, make sure they show you the closets in that loggia, because there's some very interesting.
Bingo.
That was a big.
There was a
moment
gem.
for me. It was so marvelous.
Don't give it away.
I'm not going to say anything. Don't look at the plans ahead of time. Just go. Donna, I think you said something so funny to me, and probably my favorite part of putting this together was getting to talk to everybody for like 30 minutes to an hour each beforehand. So I got really good stuff. I don't think anyone wants to sit through 8 hours of us chatting. So we're kind of compressing it down. Donna, didn't you have some kids that came in? Like, because you get, tour guests, kids sometimes can be the people who are dragged along because mom or dad really likes Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah.
But you had a little girl talking to you about how she felt, because don't you like to show off sort of the grid system?
I do. I love our grid system. We have a 4x4 grid system, and everything lines up from the floor to the, to the wall structures to the skylights. Everything lines up, especially in the loggia. And I had two very reluctant young girls with their mother. Clearly, they didn't really want to be there. We walk into the loggia, and I could not get the youngest girl out of the loggia. And I'm explaining things, and I'm like, okay, we have limited time. And she just looked up and she said, my OCD is so happy right now. She said, look at this place, look at this space. Everything is lined up. I am so happy. I literally could not get her out of the loggia.
See, that's one of those things where you just think, you know, like when you can actually touch children that would,
Yeah.
nobody, I hope everyone plays the whole sentence of what I just said. When you could, you know, mentally touch children with them seeing the importance of why this place resonates with them.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's such a big deal. And you know, Stan, one of the cool things that I really like hearing that you share at Hollyhock is sort of, this sounds bad, but the tortured history of the house. Like it's an interesting story about the family really not living there.
Right.
And you get, what I love is that you get to share that without really focusing too much on Wright's foibles and the other things. We all know that people come to us with, you know, knowledge of Wright from different books they've read, or they've read Loving Frank, or they've, you know, read one of the biographies, or they've read one of the better works of fiction, his autobiography. And he's a salesman. It's great. But I know that they're working on some other prospects at Hollyhock that were actually lived in, including, I think there were 2 other residences built. One of them, unfortunately, was demolished, which would have been great.
Yeah.
That was Aline Barnsdale House. But what about the other residents? How's that coming along?
Residence A, yeah. I mean, for people who don't know the project, it was going to be 19 buildings in total. The Hollyhock House, smaller houses, a theater, a cinema, apartment complex, retail, and ultimately only Hollyhock House, Residence A, Residence B were completed. Residence A survives. It was used briefly as a residence back in the early 1920s, but when the house was turned over, when the property was turned over to the city of Los Angeles in 1927, it served as an art center. So they installed kilns, and there's all sorts of pictures of people sketching and drawing, and you know, pottery wheels and all that sort of stuff. And it closed to the public in 2000. Has been used for storage ever since then. But then about 3 years ago, I guess now, we received some grant money to go back, having succeeded with Hollyhock House, to go back to Residence A and see what we could do there. And we've been very fortunate. For the last 2.5 years or so, it was demolishing parts of the house, taking things out that weren't supposed to be there, putting in structure. You know, when you have a house that's 100 years old but was never intended to be 100 years old, if you want it to last, you have to put in some very creative steel and things like that. But the house is pretty much restructured now. We've reinstalled the lost balcony that was on the beautiful north-facing balcony. And now we're at the point where they're starting to look at, you know, how to close the envelope back up. We've recreated several rooms that were lost. Now they're going to start getting into wiring to be honest to the house, but honest to the future as well. The future of the house is not completely determined. I know they're going to have offices for some of the staff there. There's going to be some educational spaces, but it will also be open to tours. It has a magnificent living room with an overlooking dining room that looks down into it, and a 5-bay, 2-story balcony that looks out over the Hollywood Hills. That will be one of those oh my gosh moments, that will be welcomed back to the Wright world within probably another 2 or 3 years, I think.
Well, we're excited to see that come to fruition. And Stan, it's that time, so I'm going to send you back to the darkness. You'll be able to see everything as everyone else, and then we'll
back to the Cherokee Red Room,
back into the green room or the red room, whatever. And then we'll see you in a little bit when it's time for the everyone to get together, Brady Bunch style. Donna, real quick, the radiant floor heating does still work, right, at Affleck House?
It still works. We're
Keeps
very,
you
very lucky,
and
knock on wood. We are capable of having events in the winter.
That is great. Now I'm going to be bringing Bob Bowman from the B. Hardley Bradley House in just a minute, as well as Jim Nash from the Westcott House. So they're going to come on in just a minute, but I really want, as I'm getting ready to bring them on, I would love for you to tell, just as quickly as you might be able to do it. You told me a really great story of having Marianne Affleck's daughter. Marianne Affleck was the daughter who lived in the house. And she shared some fun stories about Mr. Wright visiting.
Yes, she was a surprise guest last year. Mr. Wright had come to the house, and the Afflecks had put in a couch, not one that obviously Frank Lloyd Wright had designed. And it was during a dinner party. He flipped the couch over, sawed the legs off, put it back on the floor and said, there, now you can use the couch. Of course, it ruined the couch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and let's see, the daughter, Marianne Affleck, it was her daughter who had heard the story from Marianne. So we believe it's true. Also, at one point, there was a party with the Saranins there. And they had bought Mr. Affleck a lazy boy. And Frank Lloyd Wright and either one of the Saranins or his bodyguard or his driver, we're not sure which, literally took the lazy boy through the balcony and threw it over the top of the balcony. So it landed 2 stories down. And of course, it was never to be seen again in the house.
Oh, wow. Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much. I enjoyed spending some time with you, and we got to stay at the at a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Ohio. And so thank you so much.
That was awesome.
I cannot wait to get to see you again back in Michigan.
Two things. We do have our tours, just for everyone to know. We are doing a, hold on, I can't see. A June 19th and a July 17th tour this year.
Oh, fantastic. So people need to look at, and we'll make sure that people have access to that. So we'll put some of that. Why don't you write that in the chat? That would be great. Would that be good?
Okay, we'll do.
Thank you so much. Good to see you again,
Thank
Donna.
you. You too. Thanks, Tim.
Wow, so good so far. We've had some really great people, and you'll notice a couple people popping up on the screen. Jim Nash from the Westcott House in another Springfield, Ohio. Jim, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Jim, tell me what got you, I'll introduce Robert in just a minute, but Jim, tell me what got you interested in Frank Lloyd Wright?
I was a graduate student. I was getting a degree in historical administration, and as part of that degree program, I took a course in architecture. And lo and behold, I found myself at the other Springfield, Illinois house that we were talking to earlier, and was sort of captivated by Wright and thought, this guy does some interesting stuff. And that kind of took me down that path. And so here I am all these years later working at Westcott House, which is a fairly late prairie house in Ohio, of all places, too. So it's just a wonderful opportunity to be able to walk through a Wright house anytime we want to and introduce people to Frank Lloyd Wright and the magic of his structures. You
know, what I love is that I have you here with Bob Bowman, who is the executive director and a docent at the B. Harley Bradley House in Kankakee, Illinois. Bob, good to see you.
Good evening. How you doing?
I'm doing great. And we've had a great conversation so far. What I love about putting the two of you gentlemen together is that you both come from a little more of a professional perspective, you know, with Jim having this background in historical administration, and Bob, you as an architect. What's funny to me too, Bob, is that many people are describing to us a love of Frank Lloyd Wright from early on, but you come from a much different school of architecture. Where did you go to school for architecture, and what did that instill in you?
Well, I actually attended Illinois Institute of Technology, which was founded by this gentleman named Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. So I actually studied Bauhaus architecture, glass, steel, concrete, high-rise, practiced in Kankakee for 45 years, and in 2013 was asked to be on the Wright and Kankakee board. So all of a sudden, my history had to change from Mies van der Rohe to Frank Lloyd Wright. Of course, I knew about Frank Lloyd Wright. Who doesn't? And I'm originally from Wisconsin, so there was a connection. I moved to Kankakee, and now I'm at the Bradley House, one of his first prairie.
So that's the other great part, is having you both. You're both connected to prairie houses. So the thing I think that Jim, you and I talked about, what I really love, is that you've got a real interest in early 20th century. Is that the right term? 1900 to, you know, the Second World War, that period of history in American history. And it works perfectly for the Westcott House, because I'm going to show a picture of it. When was the Westcott House built?
They started construction in 1907. The family moved in 1908. And so, as you're saying, it kind of hits a sweet spot for me. I have a background and interest in early 20th century history. And so we're dealing with a house which is built a decade before America's involvement in the First World War. It's a really interesting time period. The automobile is starting to rise to prominence, and yet people are still using horses and carriages during the same time period. So to give a little context, the president of the United States is Teddy Roosevelt. They're Civil War veterans who walk the streets of Springfield. So it's just a really interesting little slice of American history, and we're very contemporary with our friends and in many of these other prairie homes. In that way, we're talking about a period of time that is both familiar and foreign at the same time.
Yeah, that's the other great thing is that for you, this really fits into that time frame. It's a great lesson or a challenge for Bob, because you've got, Bob, you are so focused in Bauhaus movement, that's much more different type of architecture, and you're now at one of Wright's, if not the very first prairie house that Wright designed, at the B. Harley Bradley House, and the siting is certainly quite a lot different than Westcott House, which is sort of, near a cemetery and has to respond to that. B. Harley Bradley gets that amazing river, but they're both really substantial houses. And they're at interesting times in Wright's life, because if we look at his life story, that can be a tumultuous time period for when he's sort of participating. But I think both of you have a desire to really get past that and get to the interesting things that Wright is doing as a technician. So Bob, certainly people come to you and they want to talk about, oh, I read Loving Frank and he was a scoundrel and whatever else. But the structure in that house, in the Bradley House, is really pretty revolutionary for when he built it, isn't it?
Well, it's rather fascinating. When the house was designed, the drawings are dated June of 1900. Construction started, therefore, in the summer of 1900. Family moved in 1901. The house was fully electrified, did not have gas lighting or anything like that, but electrical outlets in the floor, all the light fixtures, radiant heating, hot water heat, all indoor plumbing, as it were, 5 full bathrooms. But when you talk about structure, and what's interesting is a couple of the different houses, the house here, large, massive chimney, like he always enjoyed doing, center of the house. But on the second floor, the center of the house is also the center of the master bedroom. Beautiful bay window, art glass. But how do I get through this massive chimney? Well, he cut a hole through the chimney. So he planned for the flues to go around it. In this house also, it's very non-Victorian, but very comfortable. Open living room, open spaces, the library alcoves, the music alcove. The whole family enjoyed the space unto itself, but the living room is 22 feet by 32 feet, and the floor structure is only 13 inches. How do I get that big a space with no beams, no columns? Well, the whole floor structure or ceiling structure is suspended from the attic rafters. So he pushed the envelope. Yeah, there's just a picture of the house, and that large chimney you see on the top, he's got a 3 foot wide by 8 foot tall arched opening walking right through that chimney on the second floor.
I think that's one of the parts that I think is so impressive about the age of this house, is I don't think most people would expect that this is built, isn't it like 1900?
The house is 120 years old. 1900 is when it was designed and built. And it was unique then, not quite sure how the neighborhood took this very unique design. But even nowadays, people drive up to it and you just look at it and it shouts Frank Lloyd Wright. And it's still a beautiful, fantastic design. In fact, I'm sitting in a dining room right now, and it's kind of like my home away from home.
Yeah, there's spectacular art glass in the house, some really amazing work. Now, I feel like that both of these houses have a very clear Asian or Japanese influence. And Jim, I know that one of the things that you have gotten to do, this is not fitting the Asian thing, but I just was going to point that out for people who might go, those both have sort of an Asian feel to it. When you first got to Westcott House and were volunteering, you come with this impressive knowledge, but you obviously weren't there. You already have a job in another sector. This is a volunteer thing for you, but they did press you into doing some work. So what have you gotten to do there that's been able to help the house and the tour system?
I've been able to get involved in a variety of research topics, but it's things that I find interesting. So, excuse me. So Westcott was a gentleman who was interested in what would have then been brand new technology, the automobile. And so I spent about 2 years doing research, not just on the garage, because the building does have a garage, but also the context of that. So what was the automotive industry like in that time frame? And it had a direct impact actually on the design of the house. Early versions of the home had a carriage house. And then as Westcott gets interested in starting up his automobile firm, he then converts that carriage house space into an automobile space. Um, like our friend here at the Bradley House, we also have sleeping porches. So I've done research on sleeping porches. And I did want to actually point out something that, like the Bradley House, the chimney in the Westcott House also has a hole in it as well. So it allows access from the hallway into the front bedrooms. And so Wright is a guy with good ideas that you see cropping up again and again. And that's part of the fun of this is visiting other homes, seeing contemporary designs and also seeing designs from the other eras, Usonian homes, and seeing how Wright likes to play with design and emotion and space. And I think that's where much of the magic is.
Jim, I have some good pictures I'd like to share of the interior of the house, because I think it helps to show, what room is this that we're looking at?
It's a combination of library and meeting space. So when Burton was living in the house with his wife, Orpha, they were socially active, but he was also involved in not only his automobile industry, in the automobile industry, but also was involved in a local business called American Seeds. And so the kind of unusual Wright design table that's in front of us was actually designed as an engineering table. And it's easy to see when you take a look at the horizontal surfaces there were meant for plans. And so plans would be brought in for automobile designs or other things from American Seed, and then be put onto the tabletop. And you can comfortably stand on either side and look down at the plans. And they sit just above knee level. So it's very easy to be able to use the space. But it was also a library space for the family. So it was a dual use room. And it was not, I speculate it would have been as you can see here, a wonderful space during the afternoon. But into the evening, you would step next door directly into the next room and be in one of those very large Wright design fireplaces around an inglenook space. So it's as other people have been talking about, he divides spaces with Japanese influenced walls. You can see the windows behind, we feel very strongly are very much a Japanese influence. Just take the glass out and put rice paper in and you now have a Soji screen. And as you were kind of speaking of, I mean, Wright, I think, is more overtly influenced by Japanese design in this particular structure. Where when you take a look at the Bradley House, yes, it shares many of the same features, but it's unique to what the Bradleys want. And we feel that this home is unique to what the Westcotts want. The next space as you're showing here is this dining room space. And yet the table form is very much like what we're seeing in Dana Thomas, or for those of you who've been to Westcott House, you'll recognize the shape.
Yeah, absolutely. I just love those pictures. I want to make sure we got to share those. You know, both of you, I haven't had your tour yet, Jim, but I have had Bob's tour. And I really love that Bob, you get to take us into a space that you've developed. We only have a minute or two left, but I want you to talk about the area you've developed down in the basement area.
Okay. Well, and we like to call it the lower level, not the basement.
I'm sorry.
Now, basement has
lower level.
that connotation. But what's fascinating, right on the Key River, to the best of our knowledge, we have not flooded in 120 years. With that being said, though, the lower level has the split limestone walls, the foundation, and I happened to be looking at a picture of Taliesin West one day and went, you know, this lower level could look just like the drafting lab where Frank Lloyd Wright taught interns, taught future architects. All we have to do is clean out a lot of junk. So what we did is we created what we call our educational center. Limestone walls, we have drafting tables down there. And copies of Frank Lloyd Wright's original drawings for the house and the Hickok's house next door. So we'll bring 3rd through 8th graders down, you bring a class down, and we have what we'll call our college track or professional area. You'll learn about architects, engineers, interior graphic designers, etc. And you get to play with T-squares, triangles, and that type of thing. At the same time, half of the class is in the design build area. They get to create art glass. They work with Froebel blocks, Lincoln logs, who happen to be part of the Frank Lloyd Wright family there, his son John. And what they do is they get to create things with Legos. And then we make them flip-flop, because I tell the story that I can be the world's greatest architect, most beautiful drawings. The building is going to function and be, as Frank Lloyd Wright would say, a piece of art, of sculpture. But if I don't have masons, ironworkers, electricians, and plumbers to build my work, again, it's a team effort. And if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life.
It's a great point. You're really going to be helping a lot. I know you were able to use that pre-COVID. Hopefully you'll get to use that again. And I do want to point out that the B. Harley Bradley House is featured in a fantastic documentary called An American Home. And you can see that on a lot of PBS sites. If your PBS channel hasn't played it yet, you should call them and tell them you'd like to see it in your area, because it's a really fantastic video. I know y'all are very proud of that, aren't you?
Well, and what's fascinating about it, you look at Frank Lloyd Wright's life, professional and personal, bit of a roller coaster. You look at the B. Harley Bradley House, and Wright and Kankakee is the 11th owner. And being a house museum, we are the 5th major usage of the house. And the house has been a roller coaster. Borderline, parts of it demolished, a fire upstairs, the relationship to Frank Lloyd Wright's life, almost a little scary.
And so, Bob, we're going to end our part here, but I want to just ask, while I bring people back on, I wanted to ask Jim, one last question before we get into our round robin discussion. And Jim, you were giving a tour. I think we talked about, one of the things I love about being a docent is you get to see all kind of unusual different people. And sometimes you get people that react very differently. Didn't you have a husband and wife that had a much different experience when they came to visit the house?
I did, and I really enjoyed the experience of speaking with these two. As you will find in most Wright homes, we have a front entry which is very compressed, followed by a big release. And so as the two of them walked in, her reaction was, and his reaction was kind of, huh. And as I went through the house, I saw more and more of this kind of behavior out of the two of them. And finally, we kind of reached a point in the house going up onto the second floor. So you get that moment where you can kind of speak with people a little bit more personally. And I asked her, I said, your husband, is he an engineer? And she said, yes. Now, in fairness, I think everybody should have a reaction to the house. It may not be exactly what's right for them. And I enjoy that. I enjoy that aspect of the home, because what I get out of it is going to be very different from what somebody else might get out of it. And I enjoy the fact that you're going to have these people who may or may not be, as Wright addicted as we are, and still try to spend the time to address their questions and try to help them understand why it is that we all enjoy these structures so much.
Hey, Jim and Bob, thank you so much. All of these segments have gone by way too fast. I probably could have spent an hour or more with each of you. Now, I brought everybody back on the screen, and we do have a special guest with us, Robin Richter. And I'm going to chat with her for just a moment, because this is my mother. So many of you will have met her when she's come to visit Frank Lloyd Wright sites. And you may have seen a viral video that I posted at some point of her crying at falling water, which was really great, because the first time she went, she and I own a company called Architecture Travel Companion. And because things are finally starting to lift in areas where people are going back to tours that are safe and appropriately distanced, and we can take precautions, we have a new tour coming up. Isn't that right, Robin?
Oh, yes, we do.
So will you tell us just a tiny bit? You got a minute?
Sure. August 13th, 14th, and 15th, which is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we will be going to Pennsylvania to see Falling Water, Polymath Park, and Kentucky Knob. And we had a group last year all ready to go, and we ended up, of course, having to reschedule that now. So we have put most of the pieces into place, and we'll be releasing pricing and whatnot, and be ready to start taking reservations in just a couple of days. So we're very excited about that, because we cannot wait to travel again.
And I won't put him on the spot, but Stan Eklund has been on some trips with us. We went to Oak Park and got to stay in one of the bootleg houses, which, Stan, they sold that a week after we rented it. So I'm not sure if that was a sign of something we did wrong.
I fell down the stairs.
It may have been the reason, Mom. That could have been the reason why they... So, Mom, I think our website, architecturetravelcompanion.com.
Yes. Go there. It has a lot of good information.
The book because the phone is ringing.
There you go. I love it.
Well, if you'll put that in the chat for everybody, that would be awesome. And thank you, everyone, for letting me do a short commercial. for all the fun stuff. We have some of the great stuff coming up. So hopefully we'll see some of these docents in the near future. Okay, so I'm going to address some of the questions that we had asked. And first of all, as I get to the questions, y'all all were amazing. Thank you so, so much. And I could not give you all enough time because we could have had amazing talks. So hopefully we'll continue some of this on the Not Too Serious Architecture Hour podcast. And you can see those first on the Right Attitude Facebook page, but you can also watch them later on my YouTube channel for the Not Too Serious Architecture Hour. You just got to Google that or YouTube it. One of the questions asked was where will you be able to watch the video of this presentation? On my YouTube channel for the Not Too Serious Architecture Hour podcast. And you can just find me on Facebook or call me or just search my name, Timothy Totten. And so I want to ask a couple questions that people had asked in here. One of the questions that I would love just to start a conversation, maybe we take 5 minutes on this. Michael Slaughter sort of talks about how do you deal with Wright's personality during your presentations about your particular Frank Lloyd Wright structure? Who wants to tackle that question first? Either in a raw way or in a diplomatic way.
I'll take it.
Go ahead, Larry.
We've evolved into some specialty tours, and I was asked to give the Frank Lloyd Wright specialty tour. So I feel a little bit of pressure of delving into his life quite a bit more than we did in the regular tours. And what's amazing is I really don't have to tackle it myself because I get questions about it. You know, I hear this, and he really ran off with a woman and left his wife and 6 kids. Well, yeah, he did, you know, and you get into some of the juicy parts of his life. You try to be non-judgmental, and because it was a different period, and he was a special person and felt very, I don't know what the right word is, very privileged to do what he did. But pretty much the guests take care of that for me. They'll, by their questions they ask. But I do get into it. You can't talk about Frank Lloyd Wright and his architecture without getting into what he went through, and especially in the Prairie period, starting with the Bradley House up until the Roby House, basically, you know, and then it's gone. He's gone, and the Prairie House movement pretty much is in demise after that.
Yeah, I would assume, Ken, that you probably get quite a bit of interest from people coming to Oak Park and sort of, I know the first time I was at the Home and Studio, they just kind of said, and in 1909, you know, they kind of, it just ends. You don't really know what, and that's kind of a big year in Wright. So how do you deal with those questions? I mean, do you sort of save it to the end?
Yeah, definitely, because there's just so much other things to cover during the tour. And yeah, because this was the home where he lived with Catherine and the 6 children, and then left. Yeah, it's hard to totally avoid it. And there's people who have no knowledge of Frank Lloyd Wright's personal life, and then there's those who can't get enough of it. So yeah, you save it for the end and you answer their questions tactfully as you can. And I try and direct it to more than the history of the building immediately after, how he reconfigured the space for Catherine and the children and to have income from rental spaces in the home, and then all the things that he actually designed that it was decided to remove when the space was remodeled or restored in the 1970s and brought back to the 1909 appearance. So it's, you know, there's a lot of interesting facts there to go into without getting too dramatic about Wright in his personal life.
You know, one of the things I find really wonderful is that actually there's so much rich history for each of these sites. Like Donna, I know that when you were brought on board by Lawrence Tech and were able to give them the opportunity, you got to study with a really knowledgeable guide who's still there with you. Isn't that Harvey?
Harvey Ferraro, yes. He started out, he's a graduate of Lawrence Tech. He's 88 years old. And then he went on to become an architect. He also went on to become a assistant or an adjunct professor pretty much at Lawrence Tech. But Harvey went to Price Tower and worked for Bruce Goff for 2 years for free. It was a privilege, and he had an Army pension, so he was able to live. Bruce got, if you're familiar with the Price Tower, Bruce got the apartment, and then he had 2 apprentices that he'd stuck in a separate bedroom. They had their drafting tables on either wall, and underneath was a cot where they lived. So Harvey has all kinds of interesting stories. he was actually going to Lawrence Tech when the Afflecks lived at the house, and he was able to visit them. So we have many, many wonderful stories that we tell on the tours based upon firsthand knowledge that Harvey has of the Affleck house.
And that seems so much more valuable than telling somebody a story they can read in a book about Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah.
So I love that you get to share that, and that Harvey is still active with the house, at least was until COVID, and maybe will be again afterwards. That's really wonderful to have him as a resource, that he's still doing that. Stan, I love your tour because you get to tell so much about that relationship between Frank Lloyd Wright and Aline Barnsdall, and sort of a very interesting part of his history where you kind of have to explain why he gets to California and all that sort of stuff. So how do you address sort of the questions about Wright's personal life when they come up?
Well, we're fortunate because Aline met Frank in Chicago immediately post Taliesin fire period. And so they kind of migrate west kind of simultaneously, albeit separate. So we don't really spend too much time talking about what came before. We acknowledge the fact that he was everything that people believe he was, that he was an iconoclast, and he was hard-headed, and he knew what was right, and all of those things. But then he's an artist, and if you know any major artists, then you know that most of them fall into those same personality traits. We were fortunate that Miss Barnsdall, who was mighty iconoclastic herself, maintained a large collection. There's a large collection of letters we have between the two of them, because Wright was off doing the Imperial Hotel, or Miss Barnsdall was off in Europe doing what she was doing, and so they had to write a lot. And so we have a lot of the conversations that you might not have otherwise had. And these are two people who knew how to write a letter. And when you read the ways that they had of saying exactly what they wanted to say without actually really saying it, you really miss the value of the written word. And we're so very fortunate to have these to give you a good sense of the affection, the respect that they had for each other, but the fact that they might have loved each other's creative sides, but they simply could not work together, and ultimately came to that agreement by 1927.
I do have a question that I'm gonna put to everyone, but I want you to think about it for a little while I go to other questions. And it's going to be from Brock Stafford, who's with Taliesin in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Brock's a good friend of mine, and he's got a good question. He wants to know what makes for the best kind of tour. So I'd love a sort of a one quick sentence answer from everybody in a minute about, what's the most important thing to make sure you're having a tour? What do you want or need or whatever else? But before I go to that, I think there's one of the things I hear a lot on tours when I've gone to other houses. Now, touring Florida Southern College as a docent, unless I'm in the Usonian faculty house that was, more recently built in 2013 from older plans, a lot of what I hear from people is either, oh my gosh, I would live here in a moment. So Chris, I would live in the pope-leighey house in a moment. It is as big as I want it to be. It's magnificent. But you probably hear a lot of people telling you, I just couldn't possibly live here. I mean, where would I store all my junk, right? Many people say that. So how do you address when people say to you, like, oh, I couldn't possibly live in this house?
Well, I try to help them to put it in perspective that this house was for a family with two adults with small children. And during the 40s, we didn't have as many things for us to put in closets and store that we have today. No big Costco and everything to get 100 rolls of toilet paper and things like that. So people lived more day to day, shopped more day to day, and people really lived there and said that did help them simplify their lifestyle. They just learned to do with less. And they found that was an actually wonderful way to live. And I think I could do it too, if they just let me.
Right, I don't know why they won't just let us live in these houses. Now, what's really fantastic too is I think you've also had you had a really great tour, I think, with some of the Pope family.
Yes, Mr. Pope, the original owner of the house, did live nearby, and he did come back to the house whenever he felt like he wanted to visit, and he would bring family and friends. And one time he came and brought his son, who was in his 60s at that time, And I was giving a tour in the back bedroom and the son was back there. And so I asked him a question that I just had always wondered about and people had asked. And I said, well, you see those lovely windows there? Of course, it's one of the corner windows that open out. Did you ever open these windows and walk out of the house? Because right outside those windows is a small place to have plantings and it would be easy to use it as steps. And Mr. Pope's son just looked at me and then decided to walk out the window and walked onto the lawn and said, I have now. So apparently I put the thought in his head, and it was just a fun memory whenever I give tours and think of him just going ahead and doing that. And
oh my goodness, I love that so much. I was talking earlier, I think Larry, you and I had a conversation. I have a couple questions in the chat for you real quick. Someone wanted to ask the question, and then I'll ask you about your most interesting tour that you gave to a single person. Do you know when Dana Thomas was first opened for visitor tours?
1980.
And then
the
somebody
state
also,
the state of Illinois purchased the house.
I think somewhat, one of the things we know about Dana Thomas, if anyone knows a little bit, they may have heard that it was a renovation of a previous house. So she had given Mr. Wright a house and said, please renovate this. Somebody asked, while Dana Thomas was being built, did Susan and the family live in the original house or somewhere else? I think that's when we realized how much of the house he renovated. So were they able to live in the house while he was doing it?
Well, there was an in-law house that was part of the property that was moved across the railroad track and positioned, and then Wright finished that out. So they lived in that house while the house was being built. Because the original house, as any of you that toured it know, that it was supposed to be an addition to the original house. It wound up being, there's only one room of the original house left. So there was no way they could have lived in it while it was being built.
I know that the house has gone through different time periods of restoration. Like, a lot of them do. Stan was talking earlier about the different restorations that have happened at Hollyhock. You told me about a very interesting guest who came just by themselves for a tour. What was the deal with the guy from Boston?
Well, that's when I was just giving regular tours. Had one man walked in to take a tour, and they asked me to just give him a one-man tour. And as we were going through the video at the beginning thing, I asked him, where he was from. You try to connect, especially in a one-person tour like that. And he said, I'm from Boston. I said, what do you do? I'm an architect. And I said, oh, because we see this a lot, and I'm sure all the other people can attest to this, these people that plan vacations around visiting Frank Lloyd Wright houses throughout the country. And I said, oh, are you on a trip to see a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright houses? He said, no, I just came to see this one. And that perplexed me a little bit since he's from Boston. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I flew out of Logan Airport this morning to Chicago. I caught a plane to Champaign, Illinois, rented a car, came over here to see this house. And I said, are you going to see any more Frank Lloyd Wright houses while you're here? He said, no, I'm driving back to Champaign, flying back to Chicago, flying back to Logan tonight. It's a one-day trip just to see that house. So I felt a lot of pressure, especially with him being an architect, a lot of pressure to give him a really good tour. So our tours then were supposed to be 1 hour at max. And we had about a 2.5 hour tour that we took through the house. And it was very rewarding for me as well as him.
Maximize your time. I mean, I don't even know how you cover that entire house in 2.5 hours because of the sheer size. If you have not gone, anyone watching, you need to get there. Now you're talking about something a very short period. Ken, you've had some amazing people from way out of the country come. You told me about some people with some cars. Like, what was the deal about that?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I'm walking up to the home and studio, going to prepare to give my tour, and some nice little vintage 2-seater MG sports cars parked along the curb. I'm like, well, I'm looking at those. Hey, those are pretty sweet. And then find out on my tour, it's a group of people from Australia in an MG club. They shipped their cars from Australia over to Vancouver. We're driving cross country, mostly in Canada, dipping down. They came down to Oak Park to tour the home and studio, and we're going to end up at a MG owners gathering in Toronto, I believe. But they came there. I think there were 3 couples out of the group that had come down to Oak Park to take the tour. So, I mean, there's people like that go out of their way, just like the guy from Boston. So And they were so interested in that. At the end of the tour, they're showing me pictures of their houses and how they're inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright, and just really make a great connection.
Ken, I'm going to ask one of the questions from the chat for you, but just to follow up on that, I think all of the docents here, one of the things that you've all said to me is that you really do make some good connections with people when you give tours. I would assume all of you have been invited to dinner afterwards occasionally, or like have people who want to hey, when you're in this town, you want to come visit, right? So it'd be great if you can get to Australia. Those people probably wouldn't mind looking you up. Richard Banks wants to know, Ken, what's the condition of the home and studio in Oak Park? Richard had heard it was chopped up. How many original furnishings and lightings survive? You can tell us, I think there was a pretty big amount of restoration done, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, it had been through a lot of owners, a lot of history, a lot of things painted over, but obviously they had a lot of drawings. They had Lloyd Wright come back, John Wright come back when the restoration started, so they were able to really verify how things looked at the time. And all the archaeological research they do is they peel away things and find original colors. They were really able to bring the home and studio back to its original condition. A lot of the original artwork, some of the furniture was either still there, or brought back by family members, or from Taliesin, a few things that were up at Taliesin, or other museums or places that they did manage to recover. So it's authentic as it looked in 1909.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for answering that. So I hope that answered your question in the chat. Jim, we were just talking about somebody, coming all the way from Australia and international travel. You told me a really great story, because one of the things I think all of us do at some point or another is ask someone the question, the people, just to get an idea where they are in the Frank Lloyd Wright sort of the bit of things is, where have you been? What other places have you visited? And it's interesting how often, you might be giving the very first Frank Lloyd Wright tour anyone has ever had. And I'm sure we could all give great stories of how many people have told us or where they've been that's unusual. I'm always a little reticent to say how many Frank Lloyd Wright places I've been, because I don't want the docent to feel a little nervous as if I know more than them, because I always tell them, you know more about this house or this building than I do. If I'm at S.C. Johnson Wax in Racine, I don't know as much about as the docents are going to know there. I don't know much as Fred does about weltzheimer-johnson, because he's studied it so well. Jim, do you have a particular moment? I think you told me about a little old lady that was in a tour.
I did, as I'm sure many of the other people in this group do. I'll sometimes just to kind of break the ice, ask, what other homes have you been to? what other houses do you like or remember? And most people are very forthcoming with that, but I could tell in looking at this person that she was a little reluctant. And so, she finally piped up and said, I've been to several.
Sorry.
And
who's ringing? There we go. Go ahead, Jim. Say it again. What did she say?
So, she had said I've been to several, and I said, oh, and she said, yeah, probably the one that kind of stands out to me is she had actually been in the Imperial Hotel before it was demolished. Oh. And so at that point, I said, okay, you win.
Wow. Fantastic.
Yeah. Jim, I was watching everyone's face on the screen because I knew that they was going to get some really good face light ups, because if someone can tell you, especially a lady in her 80s can say, I was at not the recreation, I was actually at the Imperial Hotel. And
I have to tell you, she was very reluctant to say it. Now, I imagine many people had no idea really what she was talking about, but I was flabbergasted. And like I said, you won. That's probably the best story I've ever had from any of the visitors.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's one of the things that's interesting is we get these good interactions with people who are coming to visit. I think that I'm trying to remember one of the questions I was definitely going to ask, because I really totally have to ask is, we go though also as interested people ourselves. We've all been to other Wright sites, and we become the people who are the visitors, right? And I don't always like to announce myself as a docent or a storyteller, because I don't really want to make that docent nervous. But sometimes you go to places. I think, Donna, you talked to me about going to Guggenheim Museum because, you know, we get to take our friends too. Like I've introduced so many of my friends to their first Frank Lloyd Wright building. You went to Guggenheim with a friend of yours who was a big art lover. What did you tell me about the way you both experienced it? Because you had a very different experience there.
We quite literally were
Say
back
it.
to back.
Oh, I thought you were going to say butt to butt.
Well, butt to butt, I was going to say that, but we were back to back. She was looking at the art. I can't even tell you what the exhibit was now. And I was looking at the building. And we both walked outside, and the first thing we said to each other was, how did you, what did you think of the, and out of her mouth came art, and out of my mouth came building. And I'm like, there was art in there? We were in, the building is art. And she said, the building, she's kind of a weird circular, but I introduced her to it. She's been to a number of different Frank Lloyd Wright locations with me. And it was just kind of a funny story how we both saw the same thing completely different.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. It reminds me a little of Jim's story about the husband and wife, the engineer and the more,
yeah.
I don't know how you describe the wife, Jim, but that's so good. We all certainly experience it differently. Stan probably has had some of the most interesting interactions because Stan, you've taken those photography classes with Andrew. Hopefully we all know who Andrew is. He's been taking pictures of every Wright site. So if he hasn't been to your site yet, he will be at some point, hopefully soon. And he taught you a very interesting technique. I saw you doing it at the Rookery building. I had to hold on to you so you wouldn't fall. What is this you're laying on the floor at Frank Lloyd Wright buildings?
Yeah, well, you have to get the shot, right? And sometimes the shot requires you to get in unusual positions. And as you saw, I was laying sprawled out on the staircase, shooting up that wonderful spiral staircase at the Rookery. I did something similar at the Winslow House. They've got that beautiful octagon stairwell. And it happened that we were all at Falling Water doing a photo workshop there. And Andrew said, well, you have to get the proper perspective on things. And you look over there and he's laying on the floor. And so the next thing you know, we're all laying on the floor, looking up at that beautiful tray ceiling, feeling those flagstones against your back. And there's just a Zen moment that you have that, so often we go through these places and we're looking for the architectural features. We don't take the time to just really enjoy the space. And something about that, putting yourself in that position just forces you to recognize where you are, put your mind at ease, and just let it flow in. And when you're in an amazing Frank Lloyd Wright space like that living room is, certainly it just floods your thoughts. And any unzen-like things, undude-like things that you might have in there, just get flushed right out.
Stan, Judith Heineman wants to know at Hollyhock House, is there now water in the fireplace moat and in the outside areas now?
There's
maybe not at this moment, but maybe when they were still doing tours.
So for folks who don't know, there's a water feature that runs right through the house from the lily pond on the east to a water feature on the west facade in front of the house. Unfortunately, that was one of the features that Miss Barnsdall turned off early in the history of the house because it was gravity fed and it was just enough altitude change to fill it but not flush it. And if you can imagine the contents from a natural bottom lily pond in your living room, then you know why. Most of the connecting features have been taken out. We do have pictures over the years where curators have filled the moat. There's a great video of Bob Vila back when he was doing his show, and he was there on a tour and he dips his hands in the water like he's Ponce de Leon or something. But as it stands right now, the lily pond is filled. The moat remains empty because it's just the house has had too much work done on it to allow that water in there. And the water feature out in front of the house on the western facade was damaged in the 1994 Northridge earthquake. And unfortunately, you can't just call your pool guy to fix that. It's about a $900,000 bill. We have to rebuild it. So it's actually number 2 on the hit list after our motor court. So if anybody wants to donate to the house, we're going to finish the motor court back to what it was, and then we're going to fill that pool. So.
I think we could probably do a fund drive for many of these sites, actually, if we were trying that. You know, I hope everyone remembers Brock Stafford's question about what makes for a good tour, and I hope you have a nice, short, succinct answer. Before we get to that point, I would like to say, you know, Bob Gaines Hall is in our chat and was being very complimentary to how nice this is going. So we really appreciate people like Sharon and Gaines Hall who have helped save these buildings. And Bob, they were quite instrumental, of course, in the Bradley house. Isn't that right?
Well, between 2005, 2010, they brought it back from an office building, you know, a couple of lawyers and architect, and they restored the house. The amazing thing they did was, I heard earlier about carriage house and stable. I always tell people, well, you would call this the garage today, but we actually have a stable for 4 horses, 2 carriages, a cow. You know, it's interesting. That building relatively was collapsing. It was to be demolished. And that was in 2003. And that's when Gaines and Sharon came in, took a look at it. John Eichler out of Chicago had told the previous owner, well, 2 previous owners basically, back to Steve Small, it's going to cost you $1 million to restore that building. Well, Gaines and Sharon started on it in January, and Sharon is actually the construction manager. By the end of November, they opened up the gift shop, $400,000. So 11 months, $400,000. They brought it back to its, I'll just say, exact original condition using copies of Frank Lloyd Wright's drawings. It is a fantastic project, and what they did for the house is amazing.
Yeah, a big hand to them and everybody who has ever undertaken that process. And, you know, we're all here because people have felt that it's important to keep these things or to restore them. So that is marvelous. I do think we should get to Brock's question. I just want to make sure anyone who's watching understands that we had planned to go till 8:30. But we could do this until midnight. Probably we're not going to. We're going to take just a couple of more minutes. And I think with the reaction we've had so far that we may do 1 or 2 more of these in the near future. I hope all of you have enjoyed being here as the panelists. So who wants to go first, giving us just a quick answer of what makes, before you answer that question, I do want to ask this question because somebody asked it in the chat and I think it's important. Who wants to answer how do you deal with somebody who insists that there's a Frank Lloyd Wright house in their neighborhood, even though you know there's not? And I'm going to go first. I live in Florida. There are 2 Frank Lloyd Wright sites. One's in Tallahassee, the Spring House, magnificent house. If you haven't met Bird there, you should. She's an amazing lady. And Florida Southern College. There's not any in Orlando. There are apprentice houses, and I have to explain to them, maybe it's a Neil Schweitzer. Maybe it's work by some of the other amazing architects who took his ideas and went forward. So anybody, how do you handle those sort of people who insist that their friend grew up in a Frank Lloyd Wright house around the corner?
I think I do something that's kind of similar to what you're talking about. You know, I know what is where, but if they're that insistent, I'll talk about some of the apprentices and some of the related people. And then quite frankly, I'll give them one of my business cards and say, look, if you'd like to talk about this, if you think you've got something, I'd like to help you out. You know, I don't think it's a right, but I'm certainly willing to help you identify who it is.
I think there's a lot of houses that are in the spirit of Wright that it's got to be a Frank Lloyd Wright house. It's got to be a Frank Lloyd Wright house. And over time, all of a sudden it's a Frank Lloyd Wright house, and it's not. You got to be honest with the people. Sorry, that's not a Frank Lloyd Wright house.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Go ahead. Olivet University here, there used to be St. Viator's College. There's a building that has a touch, you know, in fact, maybe a little more than a touch of Frank Lloyd Wright. I was actually retained to help restore it, put it back together, give it another use as an alumni center. And everybody's like, oh, you worked on that Frank Lloyd Wright house. No, it was an intern of his who designed it. I've seen the drawings. It's not Frank Lloyd Wright. And that was just one unique one where I could, you know, prove it. But otherwise, yeah, some people can get rather adamant.
Well, if we all had $1 for every time a real estate agent called something Frank Lloyd Wright inspired, we'd be able to restore every one of these houses and buildings, wouldn't we? We would be able to rebuild the Imperial Hotel brick by brick. It's time to answer Brock's question before we sort of leave here. So who wants to go first? What makes for the best tour or a good tour? And give me just sort of a one-sentence answer.
I'll take that,
Go ahead, Donna.
Tim. So the best tours for me are with young people. I love when young people are engaged. Because we are so close to Lawrence Tech, we actually get a lot of students. And
Nice.
to me, those are the best tours. They ask the best questions. They just the emotion coming out of them when they walk into the loggia. We need to pass this along. So those are my favorite tours. I'll take the young tours every day of the week.
I love it. So I want to go to Ken next and then to Fred. So make sure you unmute yourself, Fred. Ken, what makes for the best tour?
Well, I guess I was thinking it more of the tour I give to that people I hope enjoy, as opposed to the tours that people are on. And to me, I always say it's information overload. I got a lot to tell you. Look around. You don't have to look at me, but just, try and make it a story. Show your passion. When you have passion, I think people just reflect it back, pick it up, and just see how much you enjoy the building, and it just makes them enjoy it. So make it a story is usually my motto.
So Fred, what is the most essential part, or what do you think makes a good tour?
Well, I like it when I'm challenged. When somebody says, "Oh, does the roof leak? Was it? How much did it cost?" And you get to really sort of talk to them about, no, this isn't really the truth. Okay, yes, it does, but this is that. It's a flat roof. So I love being challenged and being able to come and hopefully convince them that Mr. Wright isn't the evil person that they came in thinking he was.
Jim, what do you think? What's the most essential thing to share in a tour?
Passion. Love of Frank Lloyd Wright. To directly answer your question, the best tours are any time I can stand inside that house and take people through. Every person who's sitting here, if we have a passion for this, we enjoy doing this. We try to pass that passion along. And what I enjoy about doing that process is trying to figure out what it is that person is interested in and help them understand that aspect of Frank Lloyd Wright. And at the same time, get them to understand that this is an addiction that you've started with this house, for example. We'll be seeing you at others as well, too.
Jim, I'm going to paraphrase for you because you said something to me during our talk that I think I didn't get to, but I think it's so good. You said when giving a tour, there are three things you want to make sure you impart to people. Who is Frank Lloyd Wright as an idea? More than his personal life, but what his ideas, what he pushed forward, who the Westcotts are, the people that built the house, and why that's important. I think as somebody with historical management perspective, that's a great thing to make sure you do. And then also to be able to show people what the experience of life was in the earliest 20th century, because we really are with these buildings able to show a snapshot of a particular time. It's why the Home and Studio does such a great job of showing Wright in 1909, what that was like at his heyday of the Home and Studio. It's why B. Harley Bradley House does such a great job of showing us that turn of the century, and even the snapshots that we get in the Usonian houses, Affleck and Pope-leighey. So I just wanted to share because you did such a great job telling me before. I didn't want that to get lost. Those are three really important things. Bob, what do you think? What's the most, what makes for a great tour? You can answer that however you want.
Well, my comment would be interaction. I don't want it lecture mode. What do you see? What do you observe? What do you find? What curiosities do you have? That we go back and forth, that it's educational process, a research and investigative process. Keep digging out of what Frank Lloyd Wright did as an architect, what he designed, and every now and then somebody will come in and go, look at that detail. And I'll open up my eyes and go, I never saw it that way before. So I just love back and forth with the people.
I'm going to go to Chris next and Larry, but first, Bob, somebody in the chat wants to know, Cindy wants to know if the Bradley House is open any of the days, May 13th, 14th, 15th, or 16th. That's in a couple weekends. What's your tour schedule look like right now?
Our tour schedules are in-depth tours on Thursdays, Thursday morning and one on Thursday afternoon. Our standard tours, we're giving 2 on Sunday at 12:30 and 1:30. Click on the website. Due to COVID, the good and the bad. The good is it forced us to look into reservation systems and how all that works. The bad is, well, we limit it to family or social groups when you come. But we do have off-schedule tours, happy to be here and show you the place.
Good. So they could probably find your website and either send you a message or give you a call. So that would be a great
I
idea.
hope so. Write1900.org and click on tours or click
All
on.
right. I went ahead and put the website into the chat for you, Cindy. Chris, for you, what makes a good tour, or answer that however you want.
So for me, I go into the tours thinking about connection with what the people who are coming are looking for, and for them to listen to what I have to share, but also for me to listen to what they have to say and see if I can help them relate to the building or to Frank Lloyd Wright or to what their interests are.
Thank you so much. And then Larry, what about you?
I have to reiterate what Jim said. I think I want to impart a passion for Frank Lloyd Wright and his architecture and great questions. We have a group, there's a junior high school, private school down in New Orleans that makes a trip every spring to Chicago, Frank Lloyd Wright trip, believe it or not. This is a middle school. And they stop in Springfield and take a tour of the Dana Thomas house. And these dadgum kids have the best questions that just prod and pry. It's really great.
Well, Stan, I'm going to let you answer that question on a different podcast at some other point, because I think it's a really great place to end is to talk about passion, because I like segues and this is a good one. So I'm not even going to let you, because Stan, you have taken a very short period of exposure to Frank Lloyd Wright and turned that into a really big part of not only helping with what's the right group that came to Los Angeles? I get them all mixed up. The Conservancy. See,
Building Conservancy.
Can I do this? I can't get the foundation and the trust and the Building Conservancy. I mean, you've gone from not only working at Hollyhock, helping to train docents, helping with the Building Conservancy in just a very short period of time. Your dedication is amazing, but we also have people on this talk that have been doing it for 18, 20 years. And it's amazing to see how that passion continues, how we all still continue to see new things to share with people. And the very fact that some of you, I mean, I think, who was it already that was on a Zoom for an hour or two before this?
Yeah.
Who was that? Somebody was already on a Zoom. Which one of you guys was it? Was it Jim?
Yeah, that was me.
Jim was already he was already been on Zoom half the entire day, and he comes back to do this. So I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you participating in this for our 200 plus guests that came on today. We will have this recorded so people can watch it later. I will send out an email to everyone who was signed up for this to show them where they can get it in the next couple of days so you can watch it or share it. Hopefully we'll do another one or two of these with some other docents and maybe do some more breakout stuff. But I just want to thank all of you so much for being here and sharing your passion and your interest in Frank Lloyd Wright, not just as a person, but as the amazing architectural work that he did that's still affecting us all today, from those prairie houses to the Yosonian houses. So thank you all for being here, and thank you everybody who watched us like they were sitting at home, hopefully chomping some popcorn and thinking about where they're going to go visit their next Frank Lloyd Wright site.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
My pleasure.
Bye, everybody. We won't
Thanks,
take
Tim.
everybody off yet, but as you leave, and then we can still kind of chat. It'll be like, when the credits slowly close out. So that was pretty awesome, guys, wasn't it?
It was.
Yes.
It was great.
That was good.
Good job, Tim.
That was excellent.
Yes.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
One of the greatest compliments I read, and I forgive me for not knowing which house it was, but a gentleman who had a Usonian built, kind of against his will, got talked into it, and after he lived there for a while, he said that even when I'm at home, I long to be at home, and I thought, wow, what a compliment for the architecture of that house.
Now,
Yeah.
folks,
If you ever get a
Larry
chance-
just said that after the show and for free. That's how good that's he did that. Like, what a great topic. Yeah, that's fan. What were you saying, Stan?
Well, no, if you ever get a chance to meet Roland Risley, who has lived in his Frank Lloyd Wright for Lord knows how many decades now, he will tell you that he's convinced that he wakes up every morning because of that house, and he will learn something about that house that day, and that's an amazing experience.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I think when we saw him, he had to be 96, I think, at the time. I think it was, or 95 or 96. And I remember him saying that even all the terrible troubles he's been to in his life, and he lost 2 children to a terrible disease. His wife obviously has passed away, at we consider age. And he talked about how he still sees beauty every day in that house and still finds something that Jim's cat is just, that's hilarious, Jim. Anyway.
Yeah, that's